All right, welcome back, everyone. For our final session this afternoon, we're going to hear from Roald and Yngve Moe, and they're going to talk to us about the creative art of algorithmic embroidery. So let's please give a nice welcome to Marie and Yngve.
Why are we standing here at PyCon with a talk that has embroidery in the title? Or in other words, what is the connection, if any, between embroidery patterns, programming concepts, and computer art? And can we use Python code to create embroidery patterns in a way that's accessible and fun for both experienced and beginner Pythonistas? I'm Marie. This is Yngve. And the reason I ask these questions is that about 3 years ago now, we were, just as I'm sure many of you were, stuck inside in front of our screens a lot. We both had jobs using and teaching Python, which we love, but we were beginning to get a little burnt out on everything being all digital all the time. And we were getting into a bit of a coding rut, which isn't fun. So we were increasingly desperate to find a way to use our Python code to create something tangible to pull us out of this rut. So when we learned about embroidery machines, and that some of them can be programmed, we were instantly fascinated, which put us on an exciting path of learning about embroidery styles, exploring computer art, and creating our own embroidery patterns using Python code. So today, we want to share a little bit of this fun journey with all of you.
Let's start by talking about embroidery. But we're not art experts, we're programmers. So I want to look at it through the lens of programming concepts. First up, loops. Using loops to repeat simple operations to form complex algorithms is an essential building block of computer science. In arts and crafts, loops appear through repetition and symmetry. This is a sashiko pattern that uses repetition and rotation. Sashiko is an old Japanese quilting technique where simple geometric shapes, or at least often geometric shapes, are repeated to form an intricate composition. And traditionally, it was used to repair or strengthen cloth. If we look at this pattern, we see that it's made up of these repeating shapes, rotated. Blackwork is a counted thread embroidery, where black thread is used to embroider white linen cloth in a particular way. It likely has influence from geometric Islamic art through the Muslim population in Spain during the Middle Ages, and it was very popular among British royals. This portion of a painting of Jane Seymour shows her wearing cuffs embroidered with geometric blackwork. And if we decompose this pattern, we see these repeating shapes. Another type of counted thread embroidery is hardangersøm, or Norwegian whitework. And this is a very famous or popular pattern. It's these 8 trapezoids rotated and flipped to create a flower. In Norway, we sometimes call this a selburose, but it occurs all over the world, like here on a Ukrainian vyshyvanka. What we see here is that the technique of repeating simple patterns to create an intricate end result, which we as programmers are very familiar with, is also very relevant in embroidery. And another technique we use a lot in programming is randomness. Randomness is also present in embroidery, both through the natural imperfections in something you make by hand, but also as it can be used deliberate to create patterns that are more organic in nature. True natural patterns are not perfectly repeating, but more rhythmic. This is a print of blackwork, and if we look at it, we see the same shapes repeating, but each repetition is slightly different from the rest. And the final programming concept I want to mention is recursion. It underpins any divide and conquer algorithm. And it's also heavily used in embroidery. When we got interested in embroidery, Marie wanted to add a headscarf to her bunad, the Norwegian national suit. And she bought the pattern and she was met with this. Now here we clearly see the self-similarity in fractal patterns. This cross is made up of smaller crosses that are made up of smaller crosses that are made up of even smaller crosses. And this is only a small fraction of the headscarf. The full thing looks like this, with many of these fractal patterns. Now, we are just curious enthusiasts. And if you're interested in diving into the same rabbit hole as we have, then these are some references that we highly recommend. And it's also worth mentioning that we've only grazed the surface of a tiny amount of embroidery styles here. And there are so many beautiful styles of embroidery from all over the world. We could be talking for days without covering nearly everything. But what we've seen is that we can find programming patterns, programming concepts in beautiful patterns. But can we create beautiful patterns with programming? This is not a new question. It's been around for decades, and it's known as creative coding, generative art, or computer art. And the pioneers of computer art, they did not have the same luxury as we have today. To see their creations, they first had to take their code, turn it into punch cards, take those punch cards, put it into a machine like that, and then that machine had to use a piece of cardboard or paper and a pen to draw out what they'd made. And still, they created wonderful art. Like this by A. Michael Knoll, which uses only repetition to create this wave-like, almost trippy effect, heavily inspired by Current by Bridget Riley. Or this famous example, this is a recreation of Schotter or gravel by Georg Næss, which uses only repetition and randomness to create this progressively disintegrating texture. Friedrich Nake also used just repetition and randomness to create this work where many small lines are randomly rotated to create this maze-like pattern. Now, this one was particularly cumbersome to make because of all of the short lines. So there aren't that many physical copies of it. But by the 80s, that had changed. With a personal computer, it was a lot easier to see what you made. And a particularly famous piece of creative coding is a 10-print one-liner. I really like this one. It's very simple. Flip a coin. If it's heads, draw a forward slash. If it's tails, draw a backward slash. Repeat forever to create an endless maze-like effect. That's very similar to the work by Nake about 20 years earlier. Now, what we see here is that repetition and randomness are key features of creative coding and computer art. And another programming technique that's used a lot in creative coding is recursion, to create fractals. Here we see a Lindenmayer system, which is a type of fractal, and this particular Lindenmayer system is made to recursively resemble a weed. Now again, we are just curious enthusiasts here. So if you want to read more about creative coding, generative art, computer art, the history of it all, these are some very good resources to check out.
So we can find programming concepts in patterns. And we can create patterns with programming. But what do we do if we want to do this ourselves in Python? Let's use a simple line as our building block. To draw in Python, we can use the built-in library Turtle. So we start by importing Turtle. Then, to draw a line, we first create a Turtle object and then call its forward method. So forward takes in the number of steps we want to move the turtle and then moves it in a straight line ahead. And when we're done with the drawing, we call turtle.down, which simply tells Python that we're finished with our drawing but we want to keep it displayed. So let's have a look at what we get when we run this code. Now, a single straight line might not be super exciting, but we've seen that repeating the same shape over and over again can give us some nice patterns. So let's use repetition here and move this drawing of a line into a for loop to repeat it several times. Let's repeat it 4 times, and let's also rotate the turtle for each repetition by calling right, which tells the turtle to rotate towards the right and takes in the number of degrees, in this case 90. Now, if I run this code, I get a square. And we can use repetition again and repeat this whole drawing of a square several times by moving all of it into a for loop. So let's draw 8 squares. And let's also rotate the turtle 45 degrees between each square. Now, if I call this code, we see that by repeating them, the squares form a flower. And this perfectly symmetric geometric flower is already quite beautiful. But if we want to add a little bit of variation to get a different expression, we can use some randomness. We can do this, for example, with the goes function that we import from random. And then we can get a random petal size by calling goes, which for the statistics fans in the room means that we get normally distributed random petal sizes. And put into other words, we get random petal sizes, but in such a way that on average there are 40 steps, and they're rarely more than 10 steps away from 40, which is what the 10 represents. We can do the same thing for rotation, and get a random rotation for the petals that are on average 45 degrees, and then usually between 40 and 50 degrees. And after getting these random variables, we can use them in our drawing. So here we use the random size to decide how far the turtle should move when drawing one side of the square that makes up our petal. And then we use the random rotation to decide how much the turtle should rotate between each square petal. So let's see how this affects our flower drawing. So we get quite a different expression just from adding a little bit of randomness to our code. And if we want a whole field of flowers, we can use repetition again and repeat this drawing of a flower all across the screen. So then we need to iterate over the horizontal positions and the vertical positions, and we need to be able to move the turtle without drawing. For this, we can call pen up, then move the turtle into position, and enable drawing again with pen down. So we get this nice flower field of repeating similar, but not exactly the same, geometric flowers. Finally, let's take a little bit of inspiration from Shotter that you saw earlier and increase the degree of randomness across the screen to get an effect of increasing chaos in our flower field. And let's also take a little bit of inspiration from traditional embroidery and switch out these square flowers with parallelogram celery roses to get a fun mix of Norwegian embroidery and German computer art. So we see that with just some for loops and some random variables, we can create our own creative patterns right inside of Python using the built-in library Turtle. Now at this point, you might be asking, well, drawing on the screen is nice and all, but can we decorate physical space with these patterns? For example, by embroidering them onto fabric? That's a great question, and I'm glad you hypothetically asked. We looked into some options. We found Turtle Stitch, which is an excellent project that lets you create embroidery files readable by an embroidery machine using the Snap block programming language. This is very cool, but we don't want to convert our Python code into block programming code. We want to do this in Python. There's also PyEmbroidery, which is a terrific project that can read and write an impressive amount of embroidery files. PyEmbroidery is a great resource if you want to work with embroidery files in Python, and I highly recommend everyone checking it out. But it's also a little low level and requires you to explicitly code your stitches. And what we wanted was to be able to use the beginner-friendly turtle commands that we know and love, and then just to be able to export the end result as an embroidery file. And because we couldn't find this, the idea turned into TurtleThread. So TurtleThread builds on top of PyEmbroidery and lets you create embroidery files with turtle commands and simple context managers. So with TurtleThread, you can take code like the one we saw earlier that creates a square as a drawing on the screen and turn it into code that creates an embroidery file readable by an embroidery machine. So here we switch out turtle with TurtleThread, and then we add a context manager that specifies how the turtle commands should be converted into stitches. And at the end, we save the pattern as an embroidery file. Other than that, it's the same familiar turtle commands. So let's look at an embroidery machine in action. We see the stitches form very similar as the drawing did on the screen. And here, we show the code execution side by side with the machine. That's not really how it works. In reality, the workflow looks like this. So first, you write your Python code that creates the embroidery pattern and stores it in an embroidery file. And then you transfer that file to an embroidery machine. And finally, the machine executes the pattern. So after getting this TurtleThread library up and running, we were lucky and got access to an embroidery machine through the makerspace at our local library in Oslo. And then we proceeded to test it out by following our dream of decorating a Christmas tree with Python-generated snowflake embroidery. And after this, we had a lot of fun just seeing what we could make with an embroidery machine and Python. Yngve managed to convince his employer that they needed an embroidery machine at his office makerspace, which made it more convenient to test out lots of different algorithmic embroidery. I'll show you a couple of examples. Here is the Selbu shutter from earlier, stitched on fabric. Some rainbow-colored Hilbert curve. Some 2D ray tracing rendered as stitches on the fabric. And one thing I think is really fun to do is to use the traveling salesman algorithm on an image, and then watch as the machine stitches out a portrait with only a single running stitch. I want to give you 3 reasons why you should try this yourself, either with an embroidery machine and fabric, or just by drawing on the screen. And the first reason is that drawing is a very visual way to explore programming concepts, such as repetition, randomness, and recursion. And for many, it's easier to get comfortable with these rather abstract concepts through something visual. And it's even better if it's something tangible that you can touch and bring with you, like embroidery. So if you're learning or teaching Python, then drawing with Turtle and embroidering with TurtleThread are great tools for your toolbox. Sort of on the other side, drawing with code lets you use algorithms and programming concepts to explore art and creativity. With turtle drawings, you can gain a deeper understanding and appreciation of what lies behind the pattern that you enjoy, by maybe discovering the algorithm behind it, and maybe even using what you discover to inform your own creative expression. And the final reason is that it's just fun. Coding in Python is very useful. And it's excellent for solving interesting, important, and challenging problems. And we've seen so many awesome examples of this right here at PyCon. But coding in Python is also fun and creative, right? But it can be easy to lose sight of the fun sometimes. It can be easy to get a little bit intimidated by so many highly skilled programmers, and to maybe start worrying that your own skills don't quite measure up. And when negative thoughts like that start to creep in, I found that a really good way to chase them away is to just sit down and do some coding, simply to create something that brings you joy.
So if you're hooked and you want to try this out for yourself, we have documentation on TurtleThread.com. We have some simple getting started guides, a small gallery of examples where you can see the output of the scripts. And we also have an in-depth tutorial on how to use repetition, randomness, and recursion to create this winter-themed ornament that Maria mentioned earlier. Now, if you want to take your creations from the screen and render them onto fabric, you need access to an embroidery machine. And these can be quite expensive. But we've been able to embroider quite a lot, and we don't own any embroidery machine. We started with a machine at the library in Oslo, and then we found out that they have a makerspace at the university where Maria does her PhD. We managed to use their embroidery machine. Maria taught a course at a science center outside of Oslo. They had an embroidery machine that she was able to borrow. And lately, I managed to convince my employer to get one as well. We checked out Salt Lake City. There's Make Salt Lake. They have an embroidery machine that members can borrow. So check out your local makerspaces. Now, I hope that we have managed to convince and inspire at least some of you to sit down, open Python, and import Turtle or TurtleThread, and get started with algorithmic embroidery. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie and Yngve. And that concludes the session for today. They will be at the poster sessions tomorrow. If you have more questions or things to discuss, or since this is the last session, feel free to stick around and ask them questions here. Otherwise, there are lightning talks starting in a couple minutes in the Grand Ballroom, and the PyLadies auction is this evening as well. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow. So one more round of applause for Yngve and Marie.